Welcome to the March 3rd installment of the Library Research Workshop Series. Today we have Meghan Courtney, Outreach Archivist, and Taylor Henning, our Wayne State University Archivist, who are going to talk to us today about using the Wayne State Archives in undergraduate courses specifically. So thank you, Meghan and Taylor, you can take it away.
Okay. We do have some things to show you, so we'll just share screen here and get those up. It's going to be a relatively casual, so if you have any thoughts, feel free to just jump in, or you can put questions into the chat. But there are also some things that we'll say for the sake of the recording to make sure that's useful to people in the future too. Okay, so we are from the archives here at Wayne State. If you have not been before, we invite you to come. Actually, can we go to the next slide, Taylor?
Yeah. Is it full screen, by the way? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think so. Yes. So here's us. If you want to contact us, our emails are here. I'm Meghan Courtney. I'm there on the left, as you can see. I have been in this role for about 8 years. Well, I've been at Wayne State for about 8 years. I've been in this one for about 6.5. So outreach to us can mean anything from events, exhibits, social media, to things like instruction, working with students, both undergrad and graduate. So I do different stuff on different days. And then Taylor, if you want to do a quick hello.
Yeah, sure. My name's Taylor Henning. I'm the University Archivist at Wayne State. I just came into this role, came to Wayne State in July 2021. So I'm still relatively new to campus, but I am learning a lot very quickly about campus history. My role is to select, collect, preserve, and make accessible records of the university, student records, records of alumni, faculty members, anything really having to do with the university. And if you have any questions after our presentation, you are welcome to email me, and I'd be happy to help you access our university archives.
Okay, just a little bit of information about what we're going to be doing today so that you will know where we are. We're going to be talking about how the Ruther can be supporting undergraduate researchers, both when we're doing instruction with classes, but also as they're working on their own. So we have a couple of specialty areas, which I'll get into in just a minute, but this session, we're going to be zooming in on some examples of different things from our university archives, kind of arm, that can be really useful to students and faculty who are teaching students. So we'll be thinking about student newspapers, some information about presidential records, so records of university presidents in that case, and then some photographic collections that we have as well. So in case you don't know, what is the Ruther Library? Full name is Walter P. Ruther Library, Archives of Labor and Urban Affairs. Hopefully this photo looks a little bit familiar to you. We are just right on Cass Avenue, kind of across from the new part of the Detroit Public Library main branch. So if you have ever been to campus, you probably have walked by. And some people find it a little bit forbidding, but part of the point of us doing these presentations and working with students more in depth is that it is actually for everyone. We're not trying to be forbidding in any way. We're actually very welcoming people. So we have three kind of specializations. Brutalist indeed. Yeah, the inside is very cementy. If that is your style, come on by just to see that. So all archives have specialties in terms of what types of stuff they collect. At the Ruther, we have information about Wayne State, and we'll be talking about that in greater depth today. What we're most well known for around the world is material related to the labor movement. Most of our stuff around that has to do with United States, but there is a little bit that's international as well. And then our third area is urban affairs, which is much more specific to kind of Southeast Michigan, but that has to do with activism, politics, community organization, and things like that. You can imagine, given that our strength is really 20th century stuff, that there's a lot of overlap in these three areas. We code things so that they're in one of these categories, but it might be hard to guess sometimes which is which for just a casual observer, because a lot of the people that are active in the labor movement in the 20th century might have had some of their career at Wayne State. They might have been involved in politics. So there's a lot of overlap. The people and the organizations are really kind of conversing through these records. So that's something that really helps us to have a robust selection for students to use. Quickly, everything in this building is archives. So we're 4 stories tall. We have kind of an addition to the building. So we have a huge amount of stuff here at the Ruther. It doesn't circulate because it's archival material. And we do have, the reason that people sometimes feel nervous about coming to archives is that we've got these rules like you have to use a pencil or you have to put your bag in a locker. And all of that we try to communicate to students regularly is just to keep this stuff safe. It's usually the only copy that exists. So it's really just a matter of kind of participating fully in this community of scholars that are all working to keep this available for as long as possible. Like I said, it's archival stuff, so it's described like that. When we work with students, we do touch on that so that they are able to start navigating it. But we adjust the course material, the instruction material, depending on how much experience they have. So it can be totally for new users. We work with, I mean, I think as young as 8th grade we've done before. So you do not need to be an expert to take part in these sessions at all. The next one, I think. Yeah. So one of the things we wanted to share with you all today is how this might be useful, right? It looks different depending on the preferences of the faculty member or sometimes a community group leaders, whatever the group is that's meeting with us. What we do is we specialize in teaching people to use primary sources across disciplines. So it is, I think people assume that people in history would use archives, and that's true. We get quite a few history classes that come in, but it's not just history. We work with people, you know, from various humanities disciplines, but I think some of the really exciting sessions that we've had over the past couple of years have been more in kind of social sciences. So we've had sociology classes, political science, criminal justice. They get a lot out of that. That's a very interesting conversation that arises for sort of freshman and sophomore level criminal justice students when we think about the different perspectives involved and hear directly from the past from people involved in the application of criminal justice related principles. We've worked closely with an economics class for a couple of years now that relates to public health, attitudes towards food, and kind of thinking about how all these things are related. Honors. We have done in the law school, there's an advanced legal research class that we work with them on thinking about how to look a little further into the past than what they can find online quickly. So it ranges. It really is always customized to whatever the faculty member needs, what their goals are for the class. Sometimes it can be as simple as like, I just want them to know there are archives and that they're available to them. Sometimes it can be a full semester long partnership where we are hosting the students to do an introduction and also a series of independent research sessions. It really depends on what people need, and we are excited to talk to people about the possibilities there. The thing that I think is really cool about these sessions is that it really is a chance for students of any experience level to engage with this stuff in the same way that the professionals do. There is really no barrier to them. They can come and do this work and contribute to the scholarly record as much as, yeah. Yeah, English is one. I'm just in the comments here seeing that English is a possibility here. I think especially young students, I shouldn't say young, especially newer students, people who are earlier on in their undergraduate career, I think they're super open to the possibilities of what could be interesting in archives. And it's always really rewarding to see them kind of follow the path of inquiry that is built on their own life experience and previous reading. They ask different questions than the next person might. So seeing that there is quite a lot of just diversity of thought in this conversation, I think is really rewarding for students too. We always focus these on
Sorry to
you.
interrupt on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
To interject there, particularly because like the freshmen and sophomores have not really been on campus very much. They don't really have a good sense of, you know, what's here, obviously.
Yeah.
But when I talk to so many of my students, so many of them feel like just really alienated from school, from like, you know, all kinds of things. And they don't a lot of times really seem to have the understanding that like this university is here and it's theirs.
Yeah.
They really don't feel that sense of connection or ownership because they haven't been on campus, they've just been on Zoom. And so I've been trying to find ways to like help them through that. And one of the things that I keep trying to explain to them is like, there's all these amazing resources here. And like you guys, like you, the students, we, the students, like these belong to us, like these are ours, we're here. Like, so, but especially the sense of like alienation from campus is just really kind of a huge bummer to see. So that's, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah, thanks for that. And I think the stuff related to the university in particular, I think is really is useful for combating that feeling. They can get the understanding that students have been here for a very long time and that they share some of the same concerns that students today did, and to see how they found that sense of community and maybe organized together to ask for change. You know, the sort of things that are also challenges in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. You know, it helps to feel like you're part of something. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Yeah.
I think too, I know I had this experience, and I think a lot of other archivists had this experience of feeling like the archives was kind of hidden to them until they were in graduate school or going to do like serious research. And like, I know that happened to me. It wasn't until I was in graduate school at the same place I was in undergrad that I even knew we had a special collections and archives, and it was on the first floor of the main library. And I've talked to other archivists in the Ruther that have had that same experience too. And I think it's pretty fair to say that the archivists at the Ruther, that's not what they're trying to do. We invite you in with your undergraduate classes, or even just like if you're an undergraduate student that's curious about a topic or a person and you want to explore the collections. I think it's fair to say that we're all like advocates of that.
Yeah. Let's we show me the next. Oh yeah. Okay. So these are obviously kind of pre-COVID photos, but just to give you a sense of kind of the way that we try to set up the class. One of the things that I think is always very useful is that the students are doing. It's not a matter of us telling them what it's like or showing them things that are in cases. They're very actively using the material, hands-on, thinking about it. We do also do sessions online. If you have a class that is exclusively online, we can set it up. But you know, I think the most kind of instantaneously rewarding sessions are in-person ones. Either way, the preference is we can do it, but you can see from the photos here that when we do set it up in person and students are working together, it's an active experience. They have the ability to kind of choose their own path, see the context that's in those boxes, but also talk to their peers about what they're seeing and try to contextualize those things. And this is another way that people can kind of see that exchange of ideas, see that their questions and perspectives might be different just depending on their experiences as people and as scholars. And if nothing else, the students get to know each other a little better, which is always good. Okay, next one, I think. Let me tell you very quickly. Like I said, we're going to zoom in on the university archives, but I did want to say before I hand it over, because I had a couple notes here, that I think if I had to think of a couple words that describe these sessions, at least the way that we try to design them, is to really encourage a sense of curiosity. It can be any question you want to ask, but developing the question, letting yourself ask the question is really the spirit of things that we're going for. And like we just touched on, I think one of the most compelling things, especially for newer students at Wayne State, is these university archives, to see what things were like for people in their same shoes in the past. So I'm going to hand it over to Taylor, who is our university archivist. She specializes in these collections of any kind of format. So it could be paper, AV. She'll tell you more.
Yep. So before we kind of dive into our examples, I just want to give you a little overview of the university archives. The Wayne State University Archives was established in 1958 to preserve official university records. Today, we have about 8,000 linear feet in our holdings, dating back to 1868 when the Detroit College of Medicine was founded. 8,000 linear feet is about 8,000 like standard banker boxes, if that gives you a better idea of how much that is. Our main collecting areas, really anything having to do with the university, that includes records of academic units and university programs, colleges, schools, departments, and university offices that are kind of outside the academic sphere, like admissions, for example, or like the student center or something like that. Another huge area is university administration and leadership. The presidential papers kind of fall under that. Those records sort of help you see like the high level decision making that has happened across the decades at the university. They also include records of the Board of Governors, as well as the proceedings of the Board of Governors dating back to 1956. They also include the records of university presidents, provosts, deans, other leadership. And we also hold the records of predecessor institutions to Wayne State University. So we have the proceedings from the Detroit Board of Education from as early as 1893. We also collect personal papers of faculty, staff, and alumni. This includes everything from biographical information to research records, to records documenting student experiences, sometimes students, alumni, and then their time as a student, and then also their time, sometimes they stay in the community and the work that they've done in the community. So like Megan said, there's a lot of overlap between university archives and the labor and urban affairs records. And just because it doesn't have a Wayne State sort of like identifier doesn't mean that they're not records that are relevant to the university and other collecting areas as well. We also do our best to try to document campus life by collecting and preserving records of student organizations, everything from groups for student activism to Greek life, interest-specific groups, and those records go back to 1931. So it's a pretty robust history of collecting that we're trying to maintain. Publications in our holdings can also be interesting for students. Those published by the university, departments, especially student publications. So newspapers, there's also newsletters and magazines. The yearbooks are a really popular resource. They're fun to just like browse through to. We also have directories, catalogs, bulletins, commencement programs. I get a lot of genealogy questions in terms of reference, and those are sort of like the go-to resources to help answer those. And then lastly, our AV material. The AV material is housed a little bit separately, but I'm still happy to help you work with that material in your classes. It's extra fun because it includes oral histories collected by students on subjects from folklore to community activism, from decades ago to the present. Students are still collecting oral histories that have a lot of research value, and that we're collecting and preserving those. And then it also includes photographs that document campus development, student life, anything that you can think of regarding the university, going back to the early 20th century, really. So today, like Megan said, we're going to talk about the South End and Collegian newspapers, presidential records or records from the Office of the President, and student life photographs. Sometimes you can use these together to provide like a more contextualized understanding of a specific topic. So that can also be an interesting exercise, looking at these resources in conjunction with one another. So the Collegian and the South End newspapers are our student newspapers going back to 1937. That's the earliest volume in our holdings. So the Collegian was the student newspaper of the Wayne State predecessors, Detroit Junior College, City Colleges of Detroit, and Wayne University. It was published under many names. So the Detroit Collegian, the Wayne Collegian, and the Daily Collegian. the different names reflect the different changes to the name of the university. And then the Daily Collegian reflects that it went from being a weekly newspaper to a daily newspaper. So as a daily newspaper, there's a lot in there. There's a wealth of resources, from student opinions to more like poetry, all kinds of stuff in there dating back to 1937. We have 55 bound volumes, and they go up to 1967, which is when the Collegian became the South End. And we collect that up to the present. So the bound volumes, we have 97 that go from 1967 to 1998. And then we also have unbound issues that go from 1998 to the present, really. The South End has gone through a lot of changes, just like the Daily Collegian, but in a bit more, maybe you could say, like, radical sense. So they've gone from focusing on campus news to really focusing a lot on like student art and poetry, to becoming a radical broadside with the mastheading that you can see pictured in the bottom right here that says "One class conscious worker is worth 100 students." That was a couple of years, I believe, where they had the Black Panther logo in the masthead and that quote underneath the skyline. And then the title "The South End" as well is like reflecting its position in Detroit. And the students kind of went from focusing on campus news to focusing on just like broader issues in class and race and things like that. So it can be really interesting to look at for many reasons. There's articles and editorials, campus development, student life, student impact, and opinions on international events, not just like Wayne State University specific events, but what did students think and what were they feeling during the Vietnam War, for example, or during other major events happening on the national and international stage, elections, things like that. And then there's also fun issues in there. There's some, during some eras, they published spoof issues, especially around April Fool's Day, where it contained all satirical articles. The picture in the middle is an example of that. And sometimes they didn't announce the issues and they weren't on April Fool's Day, which led to a lot of confusion, which I think was kind of funny as well. Honestly, this one got me when I was flipping through for a reference question. I just saw it as a regular issue, and this article is called "Students Flee UM and Stampede to U," talking about how they started a transfer program where everyone left University of Michigan and like flooded to Wayne State, and that it was just like as if there were like hundreds of thousands of students here all of a sudden. And I was like, wow. And then I realized this is not real. There's a lot of hits to that. It's called the Daily Collusion. It says the Detroit Newt, like spoofing off the Detroit news. There's a little article you can see there too. This is "The Collusion buys out the Newt." But sometimes they didn't announce them, and then they had to like issue an apology. One time they said they were joking about the next president actually not becoming president anymore, and it confused a lot of people, and they had to publish an apology saying like that was a spoof. Sorry about that. So they can be really fun to look through for many different reasons. So I'm going to hand it off to Megan now. She's going to go into a little more detail about how you can use these resources in undergraduate courses.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different approaches that we have taken. Like Taylor mentioned, for a period of time in the late 60s and early 70s, the South End really was the place that was reporting on activism in the city. There are times when the New York Times is quoting the South End because they're the ones covering the story in a way that is useful to them. So it really is a super important newspaper for this period of time. This article in particular, we've used in a bigger set of material that we've got related to the New Bethel incident, which, if you don't know about that, 1969 situation where there was a Republic of New Africa meeting. So it's kind of a radical group that was meeting in a church. I mean, some people would describe them as Black separatists. It depends on your perspective, of course. But the reporting that's happening in the South End versus reporting that's happening in other newspapers is very different. So having students look at these different newspapers that are written from different perspectives and thinking about the way that you can use these as primary sources. We have to be asking these active questions, making comparisons, finding a third, fourth, fifth source that can help us to understand this better, is a big way that we have used this kind of material. It's also a really fun kind of, I always tell students that we're having to get into the mindset of being kind of investigative journalists, and that some of the questions we're asking will not have answers. So this is a great way to think about the different perspectives that are or are not included in the historical record, and practice ways that we cannot be assuming that this information simply doesn't exist, but we can be actively asking for ways that we might find it or ways that we can compensate for the lack of these things having been kept in the first place. The South End, a little bit after this period, can even be interesting for students who, there are some issues in the early 90s where they talk about people getting email addresses. Just thinking about technology and how it has evolved is another way for students to hear from other students in this voice, kind of directly from people like them in positions like them. So you can imagine that the South End is really a good support for lessons that have to do with activism, civil rights, policy. There's a lot of discussion of policy that's happening. And also thinking about the ways that universities work. Some of the people on staff during the time when they're using the Black Panthers and the masthead, there's a lot of debate from the university about whether or not they count as students. So that's an interesting question too. It creates some space for the students in the room to have different opinions and to have to figure that out. So that's one way. It can be used many different ways, but I think it's a really great kind of waypoint for us in a lot of lessons that we put together.
So next, we're going to talk about the presidential records, another great resource for undergraduate coursework, especially as like a starting point. If there was a major issue, policy, something like that, I usually start by looking at the presidential records during that time period as a jumping off point. It's good to see the decision making, but also if there's any pushback on the decision making, that's often included in there as well in the form of correspondence. So we have the records from the office of every president in the history of Wayne State, going back to Warren Bowe, who was the superintendent of Detroit Public Schools and president of Wayne University from 1942 to 1945. And then we have records going all the way up to Jay Noren, who was Wayne State University president from 2009 to 2010. So as you can imagine, the records of each president reflect major historical events from that time period, as well as the development of campus and the university during that time. So Warren Bowe's records contain files on Army training and veterans programs, as well as a file on Japanese students and employees. The David D. Henry records also contain files on war-related subjects. And then, as you can see, the more recent office of the president has a more extensive record. So Warren Bowe only has 2 boxes. David D. Henry has almost 6 boxes. Clarence Hilberry has 88. And we see similar numbers with Keast. And then Gullen is actually partially processed, and I'm almost done processing the rest of it right now, and it'll be more like 70 boxes by the end. Thomas Bonner and David Adamany also have extensive records that are currently unprocessed, but we do have them. And depending on the purpose or the course, I am definitely open to providing access to those, even though they're unprocessed, as well as Irvin Reed and Jay Noren. Even though university, like presidential records might sound kind of dry to students, they can be much more interesting than it might sound. So the South End gives student perspectives on national, local, and university specific issues. The presidential records document the decision making and the impact that the decisions have on the individual colleges, the departments, and on the students, as well as sort of what went into that decision making. Maybe there was like a committee that was formed to investigate, and they were informed by a report that led them to make this specific decision. So it can be interesting for students to see things from that perspective as well. And I think using the records in conjunction with the South End would help students have a more contextualized understanding of like certain topics and issues and events. But I'm going to turn it over to Megan to talk a little bit more about that.
So, I think one of the really interesting things about some of these presidential records is that, Taylor touched on it, you get to hear kind of the logic, you get to hear kind of the voice of the people in these administrative offices, who they're talking to, how they're making decisions. And one of the things students sometimes notice is that, surprise, administrators are not always like doing a mastermind thing. Sometimes they're just stumbling through like everyone else. Sometimes they're making decisions that are personal. Sometimes they are, one of the things that I saw when I was kind of preparing for this, some files related to what the South End was doing, and writing letters to the South End saying things like, you misrepresented me, that's not what I meant. Okay, but when we can see this back and forth, that these are regular people who are doing what they do with the information that they have, I think it really helps to kind of humanize the university for you to see that lots of people are involved in these decisions. And for anybody that's ever kind of looked at that anonymous confessions Wayne State Twitter, you can see that there are sometimes misconceptions about how the university functions, and the kinds of things that are possible or not possible, or the motivations of people in leadership positions. So it can really give students a great sense of the humanity and the challenges that are involved in running a big university. It's complex. There are a lot of different paths that things could have taken, and decisions that were made or were not. So I think that is kind of the coolest way to see, the South End. It's a public publication. It's meant to be seen by others. But with things like these presidential records, these are things that were not created so that we could see them. They were created to communicate behind closed doors in a lot of cases. So it can be very revealing, and students respond strongly to that.
I think it's interesting too, the same sort of issues that pop up over and over again throughout the decades. Like, having been a student recently myself, I could imagine like student top concerns are like tuition, class size, parking. And I found files complaining about parking going back to like the beginning of time. So it could definitely also help students feel more connected to the university, like you were saying, Elisa. So I'm going to go into our photographs a little bit. Like I said, these can be really fun, and I think are probably the most attractive for students to bring them into the archives or to bring them to our websites to look at our collections online. So the University Archives contains photographic collections, kind of can help you visualize the subjects that we've been talking about that you can see in the presidential records and the South End. So the largest photograph collection we have by far is the Wayne State University photograph collection. It contains 130 linear feet of photographs from the University Relations Division that dates back to the 1940s and reflects the activities of the public relations offices. So the collection includes series. It's very well structured for access. So it includes series for university administration, buildings, departments, academic units, campus and community, and activities and events. So if there's something specific that you're looking for, myself and the AV archivist can try to see if we have photographs on that topic because of the way that the series is structured. And then we have another photograph collection that would be really good to look at student life. That's the South End newspapers photographs. It dates from the 1950s to 1990s and contains negative slides and prints from the Collegian and the South End newspapers. I want to also talk about what we have online. Our photographs live online in two different places for now. The Ruther website is one. In the top left corner of the website, there's a black bar and it says Image Gallery. So if you click on that, you'll come to this page that has other galleries from Labor and Urban Affairs. And if you scroll down, you'll see the Wayne State University Gallery. So if you click on that, there are 5 galleries within that collection. Events, graphics, people, places, and then there's a 5th one that's not pictured here. That's, I believe it's called Ruther Events. So we have quite a few images up here, and they should be really accessible to students. It's easy to get to, it's easy to use. If you're looking for a photograph on something specific, you can use the search bar. I'm not sure if it's pictured here, not the search bar, but there's a little button up here that you can search somewhere over here. I think it's called advanced search. And if you search for a specific term, if we have a photograph that has that metadata in the associated with the image, then you can find it more easily. But I also want to talk about digital collections because we have a lot of photographs of student life living on digital collections right now. So the first one I want to talk about is Virtual Motor City. It's not actually a university archives collection, but it's a great resource for photos of student life. So it contains over 38,000 images from the Detroit News Photograph Collection. The photos date from 1860 to 1980. Because it's not a university archives like album, I recommend using the subjects, the like facets on the side to narrow it down to Wayne State University specifically, if that's what you're looking for. So you can use the subject Wayne State University. There's also Wayne State University -people, -buildings. And I haven't found like the overall Wayne State University to be inclusive of all of that. So you kind of have to like poke around a little bit or play around with your search terms to get after what you're looking for. This is how I found the photo that's featured on this slide. It's from 1936 and it depicts students playing push ball in what was known as class rush or class games. Based on what I've read about it, it seems like students, freshmen and sophomores used to have these games where they would go against each other out on Belle Isle. They would play push ball, they played tug of war through like the water. They played this game where you had to like race up a pole or like pull someone down from the pole to stop them from getting up. And the photographs of that are really fun. And this one is from Virtual Motor City. We also have two university specific collections. So Wayne State University Buildings contains over 1,500 photographs of campus spanning from 1890 to 1990. It doesn't just include pictures of buildings though, it includes pictures of students in the buildings, student activities in the classrooms and things like that. So it's another good resource for photos on student life, as well as the Wayne State University Student Life album that documents the university's history through like campus activities, housing, events, performances, sports, student clubs, pretty much anything related to student life you're going to find there. These are links on here, but thank you, Megan, for posting that just in case that's not that accessible for people. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Megan to talk about student life photographs in coursework.
Yeah, I think, one of the best parts of including these in a set of documents for a class to work on and get used to is that images are kind of visceral, right? And we saw some of the intro pictures that Taylor showed, and you can ask so many questions about what's happening here. You've got this couple that sort of, they've got old Maine behind them. They're looking, kind of off into the distance. It feels like a marketing photo. I think we can probably agree to that. But having students think about what else they notice can be really interesting too. Nobody else appears to be around. These people are, some like textbook attractive white people. What does that mean for what Wayne State really was doing at the time? And these questions are the ones that really draw them into the next step of choosing their own path and thinking about is it Sunday? Like, where are the people? Even just in the background here, you can see that I think the place that they're standing at doesn't have a public road on it anymore, but you can see that there are some vehicles parked on the curb. So these images that we see, we have a kind of an instant feeling about them, whatever that feeling is. And it can help us to make the sort of questions happen in our mind that we wouldn't otherwise get if it's just text-based documents. I think the other thing that's worth thinking about is, which photographs are doing what. This photo, 1942. So obviously Wayne State has a certain population in 1942. You can see that this is a basketball team, but the rest of it is a conversation to be had. You know, we've got 2 Black students in this photograph. What was it like for them? They're not in the promo photos. What does that mean? They are on the team. You know, what is it like? What is it like to play sports? What are the other sports teams in the area doing in terms of diversity at the time? And having students ask these questions and then find the answers, observe with their eyes the other photos that may be around this one, or what was the team makeup in 1941? What was it in 1951? What does that kind of mean for us as a culture on this campus? There are a lot of things that you can observe through photographs that point out that Wayne State is a different place, especially in the 40s and 50s, than a lot of universities in the area. And why might that be? All of a sudden, we're having a really great conversation about what kinds of people are being recruited to manufacturing work in the area, and what has been the effect of the Great Migration, and where do people live in town? And so photographs, aside from giving you an instantaneous feeling of something, also really help us to ask those questions about what's not here, and how can we know more. But they're also super accessible for practicing at the very basic level, are kind of observation skills related to analyzing primary sources. So asking questions like, who are these people? Where are they? These are the sorts of things that they get those juices flowing on the observation level. But then we start asking questions like, why is this photo taken? For that probably promotional photo, the answer is clearer. For this photo, the answer is clear, right? It's a team photo. It's how people do it. But sometimes the question is much more complex. It has to do with what's cropped, what's here and what isn't here. So it really, the thing that I think is particularly exciting about this kind of work is that it can go anywhere. Once we get the students in the space with us, virtual or in person, I can't predict what they will bring up. And so it's always different every time. It's always interesting. And I know that I learn new things as we go through it. And we have found that students, when they fill out surveys about having come to visit us, always report that they feel differently about this place than they did before. So I think that's a really powerful reaction. That's all, yeah.
I was waiting because apparently we're doing some construction on the roof. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free. If you think of something later, also you can email us.
No worries if you don't. I do want to say before we part ways that another great way, a low level way to know what's happening over here, we've got social media. So on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, we are just at Reuther Library, which I'll put in the chat. But it is REUTHER is how you spell Reuther.
So my only question is, what is involved in bringing a 1020 class over there?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, thank you for your enthusiasm. Very happy to have you. I think the next step that I would suggest is for us to just kind of talk about what you're hoping to get out of it, what kind of time that you have, and what kind of things you want the students to walk away with. I usually try to think about it in terms of, things like learning goals or objectives that we can kind of design something to fit. So usually what that involves is we'll talk about what you want to get out of it, and then we'll do a little bit of research on our end about some items that are going to be particularly useful to kind of hit those points.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that because like right now they're just going into a very basic research project. It's called the iSearch. And part of their, so it's like a research project, like a traditional research paper, but also part of it includes writing the narrative of their research.
Yeah.
So, part of it is like whatever they're going to do their topic on, and finding like primary sources, particularly finding secondary sources, and distinguishing like academic from, like scholarly stuff from like popular sources or whatever. But that first part is like a little bit harder for them to wrap their minds around. Like when I'm like, you guys, like if you're talking, like when we're talking about this and you're coming up with your question, and then you realize that your question is like not leading you to a useful bunch of information, and you have to change your question, like make a note of that.
I see.
Like,
Yeah.
that's part of your paper is like, oh, well, I was gonna write about, whatever, auto trends in the 1960s, and then it turned out that that was too broad, so had to bring it down to auto trends in the, before 63 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would really like to try and figure out a way to work that in, because they don't have to do a ton with primary sources for this,
Mhm.
but I just really, really hate to let the opportunity go for them
Yeah.
to get to the Ruther, because it doesn't seem like it's like compulsory in any class.
Yeah, a lot of the connections that I get with faculty are based on cold calling. So we still have a goal of, systematizing things a little bit more, but still working toward it. So yeah, I agree that it there's a lot of utility in it. One thing that I often use with newer researchers is essentially like a worksheet that talks about the 5 W's, and then I add in a 6W, being wonder.
Yes.
And I think that oftentimes it helps them to kind of narrow their question, because they can see like, what things am I wondering about? What things do I have obvious answers to? Maybe it's not the most interesting research topic.
Right.
Where am I actually having questions that can help me focus what I'm looking for? So I
Yeah.
think even if they are mostly thinking about secondary sources, it's good practice to think about, what does it actually mean when someone tells you to interrogate the sources that you're using?
Yeah, that's a good one that I've been trying to focus on with them, and it's not really in like the 1020 curriculum. Like they get a little bit about like rhetorical devices and all that, but one of the things that I've been really trying to make a point when we talk about those things is like exactly like interrogating their sources, and like, what does it mean that you have so much access to certain information for free and you have to pay for other stuff, and like like who benefits from that being the narrative that's out there. And so like, yeah, like tons of like media literacy, asking not just like, what are you reading, but why is this the thing that is available? Like all of these questions, I'm trying to get them to ask, like always take one step further back in their, in their view of things. So like, obviously focusing in on whatever the topic is, but also bringing the view out further and further and further, so that they can get kind of a bird's eye view and understand not just what they're reading, but why those are the things that are so available and what that means. So
yeah, I could see there being some really interesting kind of practice done with, like I mentioned about the South End, like even just newspapers reporting about a similar topic, but from different motivations.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, I mean, I grew up around folks who had been involved with the Republic of New Africa and been involved with the South End. They were contemporaries like of my mother's. And like I think that example is like perfect. And I would love to even do something, because that's so easily legible. To see like the difference in that kind of reporting, that I would really like to do something with them, like, kind of sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Let's set up a meeting to hash out the details, but I definitely think that could be a great path. Even non-textual clues can be a really interesting conversation for them. The sort of fonts that people choose are telling you something.
Right.
The
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. And I think there's just like so little room made for those kinds of questions, and they just become like increasingly important as they ask less and less. And the sort of like invisibility of like money, the invisibility of the greater like monopolization of things and all of that. I just really feel like it leads people to ask fewer and fewer questions as the stakes get higher and higher. So I think that I would really love to do that like ASAP. So whatever Monday we can come.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll email you in a bit here. Is your university email under the same name as your Zoom presence here?
It probably is, yes.
Okay.
Is it under Elisa Grulet? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
In the chat too. because it doesn't seem like there's that many folks here. And that's me. So yeah, thank you so much. I won't keep you any longer. I have to actually get ready to go to campus now. So yeah, thank you so much. This was really, really wonderful.
Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Have a good day now.
You too.
And the library system also thanks you, Megan and Taylor, for this presentation.
You're welcome.
I think that
Thanks for,
you're
thanks
at
for giving
about
us the
time.
opportunity. Yeah.
Thanks again.
All right.
Great.
Bye, everybody.